Similarities and differences exist in poultry production around the world. In Germany, production and labeling standards are driving change and creating opportunities. Likewise, technology aimed at reducing labor in all stages of production and processing are under evaluation and implementation. Welcome to Feedstuffs in Focus, our podcast taking a look at the big issues affecting the livestock, poultry, grain, and animal feed industries. I'm your host, Sarah Muirhead. This episode of Feedstuffs in Focus is sponsored by United Animal Health, a leader in animal health and nutrition. You can learn more about United Animal Health and how they're working to advance animal science worldwide by visiting their website at unitedanh.com. Today we catch up with Brian Earnest, lead economist for animal protein in CoBank's Knowledge and Exchange Research Division. We get his observations on a recent trip to Germany where he visited poultry production operations, a grocery store, a feed mill, and spoke during a pre-conference to EuroTier. Now you're coming fresh off a trip over to Germany, to EuroTier, and doing some other kind of visits, and we just want to kind of get a pulse on what's going on in the European poultry industry. What were your takeaways? So let's start with where did you go, just in general, and then we'll dig down and talk about those things more specifically. But what was kind of your itinerary? I think it was focused around EuroTier, but fill us in.
Sure. Well, I was honored with an invitation to present on a panel for the International Poultry Day by a German poultry group, ZDG, and so that was on Monday. It was prior to the event. Very excited to attend EuroTier. I had not attended before. I was familiar with the with the event, the exhibition itself, but in terms of the numbers, they typically have well over 100,000 attendees at this event, and I think there's something like 17 pavilions that they fill. So a massive scale in terms of the overall footprint that they have for this event. But in addition to that, it's kind of the focus this year was on animal husbandry. And the event that I was with was specifically more on poultry. So they had asked me to present with a view on sustainability in the U.S. poultry, and specifically more on the broiler side, and what we're seeing there. So interesting event. I'm glad to attend.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, what event do you have where you're like taking a bus between buildings, right, to get to like the dairy, the swine, if you want to do that, or of course you can walk it. But you must have probably did what we did when we were there a couple of years ago, walk around and just kind of take it all in and say, wow, this is, what we're seeing in terms of maybe housing or in terms of feed or just in terms of general production practices. Were there some like key observations, key takeaways from your time at EuroTier, some of those things that really kind of caught your eye, that gave you those aha moments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, what I was trying to do observationally was see some of the new technology there. And I think what we've heard from some of the producers in the U.S. is that they are typically looking to Europe in terms of some of the manufacturing processes on the broiler side, implementing more automation, on the deboning lines and things like that. And a lot of that technology seems to kind of stem from Europe and some of the producers there. And so, that was one area of just observation to try and see, in comparison, what is occurring there, or what manufacturing equipment they had there. But on top of that, I was kind of looking at all the things that are, I would say, related to animal protein production. If you think about a holistic approach of what the benefits that come out of animal protein production, some of the things that we don't typically think about, like non-meat items. One of those in animal protein production, a side effect is methane emissions. And I noticed there was a tractor there, it's New Holland, that was powered by methane. And they were looking at new containment units for the tractor for storage for fuel. And I thought that was an interesting kind of new technology. It seems like the last couple of years they're trying to figure out how viable that is out in the field. So that was one just outside of my typical, what I'm looking at for the poultry side. So
Probably a lot of robotics and automation, as you mentioned, just how we can do things with less labor. There's some savings there and also some advantages, I'm sure.
Yeah, and they certainly have to think about that. I was able to tour a processing facility in Germany while I was there and saw firsthand some of the high level of automation in the plants there to where they're able to achieve line speeds of, I think this plant was 250 birds per minute on one line that they were pushing through, and a lot of that is one is carcass uniformity, the smaller bird size, and what their objective is to produce in terms of a product, but also the high degree of automation, even on the front end side. So when we're going to evisceration or control atmospheric stunning, those systems in place are helping them, in terms of achieving those line speeds that I was observing there. So interesting to see.
Was that a turkey processing, broiler processing facility you went through?
That one was a broiler processing facility. I was able to tour a turkey processing facility as well, and kind of similar that they controlled atmospheric stunning. It's I think it's a mandate that they utilize that in Germany. So a lot of the regulation is kind of putting in place some of these more, I guess, thought of as humane practices, but that's also providing more efficiencies in terms of putting a turkey on a line that's maybe 40 pounds. It's a lot easier as that turkey's already been put to sleep. So those sort of things, it just kind of falls in line with working towards efficiency and productivity.
So do you see, let's just take a little sidetrack here. Do you see the poultry industry over there growing? Is it stable? I mean, they've got a lot more, as you mentioned, different requirements when it comes to production or processing. What's that industry trending? What's going on?
I think some of the growth has been, somewhat stalled out, specifically in Germany, but also in Europe, largely as a part of regulation. So they are, I guess, kind of seeing a lot of pushback in terms of regulation, things like animal husbandry practices. And I noticed this, I asked kind of first when I landed, can I go see a grocery store and see some of the products on the shelves and look at just the labeling, what the consumer's seeing there. And one of the labels is it's instituted by, I think, the kind of top 4 retailers in Germany or in Europe in general. And it's around animal husbandry practices, and it's a numbering system 1 through 4, where 1 is kind of the most common practice of animal husbandry, up to 4 is the most stringent and includes slow growth, more of the slow growth production, and the majority of the production is in a level 2, which has requirements around stocking density and that sort of thing in the barns. And I asked, does the consumer really understand what this labeling is? And the response was, I'm not really sure that it's conveyed appropriately to the consumer where they understand. But lo and behold, it's something that has to be on the label. And then beyond that, I was asking about kind of the requirements. And one of those is that, they're going beyond stocking density, and they're going to make requirements around activities for the birds in the houses for that like level 2 category. So they're going to change the requirements over the next 2 years, which, if the grower is focused on that versus best practices that they know, for growing the birds, that overly complicates growing production as well. So those are some of the hurdles I think that they're overcoming. Land values are extremely high, especially I was staying in Lower Saxony for the majority of the time, which is a heavy animal protein production region. And land values, they said there were somewhere around $120,000 per hectare right now, which is, it's difficult to use conventional methods of growing animal protein production when your land costs are that high, regulation is high. So overall, some pretty big constraints in growth.
So we talked about this numbering system at the grocery store. Is there like a QR code or where if someone wanted to go get what those numbers mean, is it stated on the label or do they have to like go to a website to say, okay, number one means this, number two means this?
Yeah, it wasn't necessarily stated on the label like what number 1, 2, 3, 4 mean. But it's a good question. I hadn't quite looked into like, all right, how does the consumer understand what that means for them, what the benefit is overall? And I think it kind of lacked clarity there. I do think they're kind of in the development process, and it's not a government regulation. It's a regulation, or it's something that's being instituted by grocery stores, is my understanding. So, and not all the retailers are utilizing it. So, kind of the top 4 are, but then you may go to the one down the street, your local shop, and they're not utilizing that numbering system. The other thing I noticed was it was more the store brands that are utilizing this animal husbandry labeling, and not necessarily the I would say like Packer label or your traditional poultry or dairy, any of those labels. So.
Did you get a sense at all if the poultry industry over there was involved in the establishment of that kind of a labeling system, or is it something that, like you mentioned, was just at the retail level and they're pushing it through, and that's what's happening?
Yeah, I do get a sense that yes, the poultry industry is involved in it, and trying to assess and trying to help the retailer understand, one, the cost component associated with some of these practices. If they're moving to a slow growth bird, let's say, it takes 1.5 times as long to grow that bird to market weight. Well, it takes often twice as many resources in terms of how much land is being utilized, how much feed is being utilized, how much water. All those things kind of factor into a higher cost profile for the product that they're bringing to shelf. And that's one of the things they're finding difficult to communicate. You're talking about a very specialized product, a niche product, versus your commodity type item, and they're having some degree of difficulty making sure that the retailer understands fully that in order to bring this to shelf for your customers, it's going to cost a lot more. Which, to a certain degree, we're seeing that in some U.S. retailers as well, right? There's some of the chains that want to differentiate their product and want to offer a product in terms of poultry that may have that slow growth to it, or some other attribute. It's a specialty product, and effectively communicating the additional costs that's involved in that, and what are you really gaining in terms of animal husbandry practices. It's difficult for the retailer to assess that, and ultimately the consumer. So that was kind of one of the observations that I think is a similarity to the system we have in the U.S. as well.
You mentioned, I think, or I heard you went to a feed mill as well. Did you have any takeaways from that?
Yeah, the one I went to in particular was interesting, just in the fact of how the grain deliveries occur. They had access through inland channel system direct to the feed mill, by rail and by over the road trucking. So really, it was fascinating to see kind of the network of the grain coming to the feed mill itself. Also, I was kind of asking about the mix of feed ration that they're using for broiler feed there, which typically in U.S. processors, I think they're kind of not necessarily standard, but somewhere around 60% corn and 30% soybean meal. Whereas there's much more wheat in the equation, and they're looking at non-GMO feed for the feed that the raw material, the feedstock that they're bringing into the feed mills. So it's kind of some key differences, but fascinating to see that running around the clock to get the feed to the houses.
Are they as consolidated? I mean, do they have the whole integrator kind of operation set up over there as we have here?
For Germany, yes, there's a more integrated process on the broiler side. Not as many players, clearly, and the difference. It's interesting geographically. You think about Europe; these are from a landmass standpoint, Germany may have different regulations in place than, say, their neighbor, right? And Austria, I was hearing that they're one that has had some difficulties in terms of the regulations coming in place. In that the regulation is on the growers there, not necessarily any product coming in, because the EU has free trade in between the nations. So they're not restricting trade based on the animal husbandry practices or production methods, but they would be regulating the internal production for the country. And they're one who has instituted a slow growth, which has limited their capacity for production. So, for instance, I think chicken from Poland coming into Austria is provided at a much lower price point, and they gain market share there. So it's kind of interesting to think about, how their strategic advantages are outside of country, and they're kind of hurting their domestic production in some areas.
Kind of a complex web of things, it sounds like. So
Yeah, I don't
do
have
you think
all of
that,
it.
yeah, do you think that is like moving companies? Like we're going to move out of this country, out of say Austria, because they've got stricter rules, and we're going to go over to Poland where we can produce at different levels and ship it back into Austria? Did you get a sense if any of that takes place?
I didn't quite get that deep, but I do think, in our country, you're seeing some of these things play out. Overall, it seems like the stronger regulation is becoming more popular throughout Europe. So more stringent regulation on these animal husbandry practices, environmental impact, across the board, is becoming much more cumbersome for producers. And when you talk to producers, they put food safety and safety paramount in front of everything they're doing. Stewardship of animal resources is at the top of the list of things that they're concentrating on. And then, they want to continue to provide an economical product for the consumer. And then they want to make sure that they're doing that in an efficient manner, and making sure that overall they are investing in implementations either at the processing facility or upstream, using technology to be more efficient. And all these things, I do see best practices like that in place, and for a lot of the U.S. processors that we talk to. It's interesting to see it there as well, that, on top of all that, they say, well, these regulations that are coming into place, the regulators may not necessarily understand what they're trying to implement and what that really means in terms of resource use and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's interesting to see all that come together.
And the mobile housing, you probably saw that, because that kind of was a surprise a couple of years ago when we were over there. The big trailers that just move around the facility to give them more, grass or whatever it is they're putting the birds on.
Yeah,
Did you see much of that? We had to go through those and check those out, because we're like, what is this? So
I didn't get a chance to. I know I've kind of seen them, in video or online, but that sounds absolutely fascinating. So
yeah, it was kind of neat. So lots of new things, and yeah, we learn by going to other parts of the world to see what's going on there, and can do that comparison. So, what would you say would be your like key takeaways from your comparison between the U.S. and German poultry industries?
I think there's quite a few similarities. The thing that they asked me to present on in the panel that I was able to be a part of was thinking about sustainability in poultry. And I, as an economist, quite simply went to efficiencies and productivity, the concept of doing more with less. And I think that's kind of a takeaway that I saw there and talked about, and it resonates across the board. And I think the producers there, wholeheartedly, that is what they are focused on. Is continuing to listen to the consumer of what they're looking for. One of the data points I presented on, Kansas State University puts together their meat demand monitor on a monthly basis, and kind of the attributes that consumers are looking towards. They're asking the question of, what are you looking for in your animal protein? Consistently, that food safety, price, nutritional value, these things all kind of float towards the top. Concerns about environmental impact are typically towards the bottom. I think that kind of, to me, it shows that the consumer expects the producer to have this in the forefront of what they're doing. And, oftentimes you think we don't really need to talk about it, but overall, it's kind of understated the good practices and what they really mean for the consumer overall, but products that are available to us. So those are some of the things that I think just kind of take away from observations here and what I saw there.
So, Brian Earnest, lead economist for CoBank. Thank you, Brian. Thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you. It was great talking with you.
This episode of Feedstuffs in Focus was sponsored by United Animal Health, a leader in animal health and nutrition. You can learn more about United Animal Health and how they're working to advance animal science worldwide by visiting their website at unitedanh.com. I'm Sarah Muirhead, and you've been listening to Feedstuffs in Focus. If you would like to hear more conversations about some of the big issues affecting the livestock, poultry, grain, and animal feed industries, subscribe to this podcast on your favorite podcast channel. Until next time, have a great day, and thank you for listening.